All right, so here we go. We're on day one of this book study, reading through the writings of Father Bob. Uh, the first book we're looking through is We Are Called to Be Companions of the Cross. My goodness, this book is incredible. If you're trekking with me, we should be reading the first chapter today. The first chapter from this book, and it's just jam-packed with so much wisdom. Like Father Bob, it's incredible. Like I could have done videos for every little section in this first chapter. He starts off by looking at the lay of the land, right? He's such a prophet, looking at the current state of the world. He wrote this book in the early 90s. And if you look at through that lens of from the 90s until now, you could see that his predictions of where the world is going is true. The moral corruption that's happened, stuff in the political world, economic world, and his prophetic read of where things are going. But yet he says in that first chapter, if you read with me, he doesn't lose hope over it, but he sees it as an opportunity for the proclamation of the gospel. Right? He says even the current structures that we're in are falling apart, the structures in our society, but yet we are prime for Jesus. And I think there's so much I could speak on in this chapter, but I think I want to speak on his whole section on the renewal of the parish. And he shares this beautiful testimony of his beginnings at St. Mary's. And he says at one point he says he was resistant to being a pastor, right? He was a school teacher for most of his priesthood. For the first 30 years of his priesthood, he had never been a pastor. And he was saying when the bishop would bring it up, he would make some sort of an excuse, right, to avoid being in the parish. But yet he experienced the Lord powerfully in his priesthood through the charismatic renewal. He had this experience of the Holy Spirit, and his priesthood was transformed. His prayer life was transformed. His very life was transformed in the Holy Spirit. And he started doing preaching. He was on preaching circuits at conferences and stuff. And there was one such summer in 1984. And he was preaching 3 conferences across Canada, one in the west, one in the east, one central. And he felt the Lord saying, preach on parish renewal. Which is funny, right? Because he had never been in a parish yet. But he was pretty in tune with the Lord. And he felt the Lord saying, just preach on vision. And I thought, what better than to read from his very words on vision. It's a little bit of a lengthy paragraph, but I thought I would share this with you. Just as you're listening, and you've probably read through this already, allow the Lord to build up expectation and excitement in your heart and what a parish could look like. So this is what he preached on at those conferences. He says this. This, of course, was not terribly profound, but I went on to describe what a renewed parish might look like. The celebration of the liturgy would be lively, with lots of participation. Our churches would be filled with enthusiastic worshipers, most of whom would get there early to get a good place to sit. The front rows would be filled up first. The preaching would be powerful and combine with the rest of the celebration to bring people to conversion. We would begin to see, perhaps first in a modest way, signs and wonders worked by the Lord to accompany the authentic proclamation of his word. Ministry visions would arise as the people, touched by God's grace and brought along the path of personal renewal, would begin to get prepared and sent out to do the Lord's work. There would be all kinds of ministries of evangelization, teaching ministries directed to people at various stages of spiritual growth, and ministries of caring that would reach out to the poor, the sick, the unemployed, the desperate, the lonely, the imprisoned, and scores of others who have been pushed to the margins of society. Relationships would be building, and people would begin making commitments not only to the Lord, but to one another as covenants would take shape. And last, but certainly not least, the pastors would concentrate on pastoring. Out of administration altogether, they would do what the apostles said they must do: get back to prayer and the service of the word. And so after this summer of preaching these 3 conferences, and Father Bob talking on his vision for parish renewal, this beautiful vision, he felt the Lord saying to him, stay quiet and wait, because the Lord was going to do something and change his agenda. And to the humor of God, and I guess a little bit of a surprise to Father Bob, his bishop appointed him to be the pastor of St. Mary's Parish in Ottawa. And, he had been avoiding and resisting being a pastor for these 30 years, and now is his time. St. Mary's at one point was a flourishing parish, but as time went on, the parish dwindled, and it was essentially now a dead parish. There really wasn't many people there. And he was talking to his pastor, the pastor of St. Mary's before him, and the pastor described the parish in very Canadian terms, saying, you can stand at the front of the church at any of the weekend masses and throw a snowball down to the back without hitting anyone. It's in a sense a humorous way of saying the sad reality of the parish. But Father Bob, he still waited on the Lord, and he was a man of prayer. So he turned to the Lord in much prayer and said, Lord, what would you have me do here? And the Lord told him, give him permission to wait on the Lord. And again, in Father Bob's own words, this is what the Lord was communicating to him about St. Mary's. I don't want you to do anything except the very obvious things that a pastor must do. I want to take over here myself. I don't want any of your programs or ideas. I have a plan of my own. But what I want from you is your permission. I want you to give me permission to do what I want to do. And not only that, I want you to tell the people that you are giving me this permission, and that I want their permission too. If I get enough permissions, I'll move. When I do, you will see it. You can then point it out and get everyone to support it. And so that's what he did. Father Bob started preaching permission. He did this for over a year, and he did it in various ways. He started getting creative. He was saying to them, let's consult the Lord. He said, are you satisfied with the condition of the church and of your life in the parish? And he just started stirring up in their hearts an anticipation of saying, let's get behind what the Lord wants to do. And let's wait till he gives us his word. And so they did, and eventually they started seeing the Lord move in powerful ways, and they started seeing conversions in the parish. As a child, I went to St. Mary's growing up in the 90s, and I'd turn around and I'd see grown men crying. And it's funny, as I was reading this, Father Bob says the same thing. Grown men would start crying, and it's not because his homilies were bad, it's because they were being moved by the Holy Spirit. There's so much more that I could say about this chapter, but what I want to leave you with is Father Bob's understanding of waiting upon the Lord, giving God permission, the primacy of evangelization and conversion. Father Bob was passionate about the church. He was passionate about the transformation of lives and the work of the Holy Spirit. And so let us continue as we're reading through his book to have that same passion in our own hearts and to have great expectation of the Lord, of what he wants to do in our parishes, in our lives. I'm excited to be journeying through these writings of Father Bob with you, and I look forward to seeing you next week. God bless.